The coffee stain on the floor was still there when I returned. 3 years had passed, and that mark remained exactly as I left it. It's strange how some things endure while others are ripped away without warning. My daughter was only 2 years old when they took her from me, when I was taken from her. All because of words. False words, but powerful enough to destroy everything I loved most. Have you ever felt what it's like to have your entire life shattered by a lie? A lie so terrible that even when proven false, still marks you as guilty forever? My name is John. I'm 25 years old now. I'm sitting in this empty park because sometimes it's the only place where I can breathe without feeling all eyes on me. Even after the truth came out, even after I was released, people still look at me as if I were a monster. I spent 2 years in a detention center for something I never did. 2 years away from my daughter because of an accusation invented by her own mother, my ex-girlfriend Vanessa. An accusation so repulsive that I still have difficulty pronouncing the words. She said I had abused our own daughter, our baby, who was just 2 years old. Do you understand the level of cruelty? Do you understand what it's like to be accused of hurting the person you love most in the world, the one you swore to protect with your own life? When I left the detention center a few months ago, I realized my real sentence was just beginning. The accusation may have been proven false, but the stigma never completely disappears. Before I tell you how it all happened, before I explain how an argument transformed into the worst nightmare of my life, I want you to understand, I'm not a perfect victim. I made mistakes. I was stubborn. Sometimes I lost patience, but never, at any moment in my life, would I harm my daughter. She was and still is the reason I wake up every day. If you're really paying attention to me, if you can feel some of the desperation in my words, I need you to like this video right now, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and comment what time it is where you're watching from. This isn't just another story to entertain you for a few minutes. It's my life. And by commenting, you show me there are people willing to hear the other side, to hear the truth that's been silenced for so long. What I'm about to tell will explain how an ordinary young man with ordinary dreams ended up labeled with the worst possible accusation. How a lie told in the heat of hatred can destroy not just one, but several lives at the same time. How the system that should protect the innocent can be easily manipulated by someone determined to cause harm. And maybe, just maybe, my story will make you think twice before believing accusations without evidence. Because words have power and lies have consequences. It all started in an ordinary way, like so many other stories out there. I met Vanessa when we were both 20, working at the same supermarket downtown. I was in the stockroom, she was at the checkout. It wasn't a cinematic romance, just two young people who were attracted to each other and started dating. I was still living with my parents, finishing a technical course in electronics. She lived with an aunt after her parents moved to another state. Vanessa was beautiful, talkative, full of energy, the type of person who enters a room and everyone notices. That attracted me right away, since I was always more reserved. In the first few months, everything was perfect. We went to parties, spent entire weekends together, made plans, normal plans of ordinary young people, maybe a trip, maybe living together someday. What I didn't notice in those first months were the small signs, how her mood could change drastically from one moment to the next, how she could be laughing and seconds later enter an intense argument over something minimal. At the time, I attributed this to a strong temperament, an intense personality. My friends tried to warn me, but who listens to advice when they're in love? 3 months after we started dating, Vanessa told me she was pregnant. It was a shock for both of us. It wasn't planned. We weren't prepared. She immediately talked about not having the baby. She said we were too young, that we had plans, that she wasn't ready to be a mother. But something inside me transformed at that moment. The idea of having a child, of raising a person, of being a father, that touched something deep that I didn't even know existed. I asked her to reconsider. I promised I would take on all the responsibilities, that I would take care of everything, that she wouldn't need to sacrifice her dreams. After many conversations, many tears, and some arguments, she agreed to continue with the pregnancy. My parents were disappointed at first, but soon they supported us. Her parents, even from a distance, also accepted it. Vanessa's aunt offered her house for us to live together. since she had an extra room. I left my parents' house and we moved in. I started working full-time, putting the technical course on hold. During the pregnancy, Vanessa's emotional ups and downs intensified. The doctor said it was normal, it was the hormones. She would go from euphoric to deeply depressed in a matter of hours. Sometimes she accused me of not loving her anymore, of being with her only because of the baby. Other times, she said I was the best man in the world, that she was lucky to have me. Our daughter, Sophie, was born on a March dawn. It was the most incredible moment of my life. When the nurse put her in my arms, I silently promised that I would do anything for her, that she would always be my priority. In the first few months, everything seemed to be going well. Vanessa adapted to motherhood better than we expected. I worked during the day and took care of Sophie at night so Vanessa could rest. It was exhausting, but seeing my daughter growing, starting to smile, recognizing my voice, it was all worth it. It was when Sophie turned 6 months that things really started to deteriorate. Vanessa began having crying spells for no apparent reason. She got irritated when Sophie cried, constantly complained of exhaustion. Initially, I thought it was late postpartum depression and suggested we seek help. She vehemently refused. She said I was insinuating she was crazy, that she was a bad mother. Our first big fight happened around this time. She threw a plate against the wall, so close to my head I could feel fragments in my hair. Sophie was in her crib in the next room and started crying at the noise. When I went to calm her down, Vanessa screamed that I always chose the baby instead of her. Vanessa's aunt, Mrs. Clara, began to intervene more. She had experience as a nurse's aide and suggested Vanessa see a psychiatrist. After much insistence, she finally agreed. She was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. The doctor explained that she probably already had the condition before, but the pregnancy and new responsibilities had intensified the symptoms. With the diagnosis and medication, we had a few months of relative peace. Vanessa seemed more stable, more present. We celebrated Sophie's first birthday with a small party. I took pictures of her smeared with cake, taking her first uncertain steps. We thought the worst had passed, but then Vanessa started skipping doses of her medication. She said the pills made her feel dead inside, that she couldn't feel anything. When I tried to insist on the importance of treatment, she accused me of wanting to control her, of treating her like an invalid. The fights returned, more and more intense. She broke things, screamed, left the house, and returned hours later without saying where she had been. The worst part was that many of these fights happened in front of Sophie. I could see the fear in my daughter's eyes when Vanessa screamed. I began to be truly concerned, not just about our relationship, but about my daughter's well-being. When Sophie was 1 year and 8 months old, I suggested to Vanessa that we should separate. I said we could share custody, that she could continue her treatment without the pressure of maintaining our relationship. I proposed that I could take primary custody of Sophie while Vanessa stabilized. This suggestion triggered the worst crisis yet. She accused me of wanting to steal her daughter, of planning this from the beginning. She said I never loved her, that I only wanted a family because my own childhood had been problematic, which wasn't even true. The discussion escalated until she started throwing objects at me. When I tried to contain her, holding her arms so she would stop throwing things, she screamed that I was hurting her. Mrs. Clara entered the apartment at that moment, alerted by the screams. She saw Vanessa with red marks on her arms where I had held her and immediately assumed the worst. I asked her to calm down, to hear my side, but Vanessa took advantage of her aunt's presence to amplify her accusations. That night, I slept on the couch. Sophie cried several times during the night, but every time I tried to go to her, I found the bedroom door locked. Vanessa shouted through the door that I should leave, that she didn't want me there anymore. The next morning, when I finally got to see Sophie, I noticed something that froze my blood. She had a purple mark on her arm, the size of an adult's thumb. When I asked Vanessa what had happened, she evaded the question. She said Sophie had hit herself on the crib while sleeping. That was the limit for me. I picked Sophie up, told Vanessa I was taking our daughter to spend the day at my parents' house and that we would talk later. She tried to stop me, held my arm so tightly that her nails left marks. I managed to leave anyway. At my parents' house, I broke down. I told them everything. The crises, the diagnosis. The irregular medication, the fights, the mark on Sophie's arm. My mother, who always had reservations about Vanessa, suggested I not return to that house, that I seek legal help to get custody of Sophie. That was my mistake. I should have followed her advice immediately, but I still believed I could resolve the situation, that Vanessa just needed help, that we could find an arrangement that worked for everyone. I returned to the apartment that night after leaving Sophie with my parents. I expected an argument, more screams, maybe more broken objects. But what I found was worse, much worse. When I arrived at the apartment, Vanessa was sitting calmly on the couch. That calm was more frightening than any scream. She looked at me with cold hatred in her eyes and said, "If you try to take my daughter from me, I'll make you regret it for the rest of your life." I tried to stay calm. I explained that I didn't want to take Sophie from her, just to ensure our daughter was safe and happy, that we could find an arrangement that worked for everyone. I suggested family therapy, mediation, anything that would help resolve the situation peacefully. Vanessa laughed. An empty laugh without humor. "You really think you're so perfect, the exemplary father? You think anyone's going to believe you instead of me?" Those words gave me chills, but I still didn't understand what was coming. I said I would pick up Sophie the next day, that maybe it would be better for us to spend a few days apart to cool our heads. Vanessa just nodded, still with that strange smile on her face. The next morning, I received a call that would change my life forever. It was from Child Protective Services. A counselor with a formal and cold voice informed me that they had received a serious complaint against me, that I should appear immediately to provide clarification. When I asked what the accusation was, she hesitated and then said in a low voice, "The terrible act against your daughter, sir." The world stopped, literally stopped. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think. The words seemed to make no sense, as if they were in another language. When I finally managed to speak, my voice came out strangled. "This is a lie. It's a complete lie." The counselor only replied that I should appear with a lawyer, if possible. I hung up the phone and vomited right there in the middle of my parents' living room. In the days that followed, I discovered what Vanessa had done. She went to the police station the morning after our fight with Sophie in her arms. She told the officers she had discovered horrible things happening when I was alone with our daughter, that she had noticed strange behaviors in Sophie, irritation and redness in parts of her body, crying when I approached her. She said that when she confronted me, I became aggressive and threatened to hurt her. To prove her story, she showed the marks on her own arms, where I had held her to prevent her from continuing to break things. She showed the purple mark on Sophie's arm, which she had probably caused herself. And then the final blow. She presented a diary supposedly written by her over months, detailing her growing suspicions about my behavior with Sophie. A completely fabricated diary, of course, full of observations and incidents that never happened, but written with calculated precision, with dates, times, small details that gave verisimilitude to her monstrous lie. The system machinery began to work immediately. Sophie was taken for examinations. I was summoned to testify. The apartment where we lived was searched. My parents were interrogated. My entire life was exposed and analyzed by strangers, looking for signs of a perversion that never existed. The results of Sophie's physical examinations showed no evidence against me, but that wasn't enough to close the case. The authorities argued that not every case like this leaves physical marks. Vanessa continued to feed the accusation, adding new details to each testimony. Mrs. Clara, Vanessa's aunt, initially supported her niece. She had seen me holding Vanessa's arms during that fight. She had seen the mark on Sophie's arm. In her head, these pieces fit into the narrative Vanessa was constructing. She testified that she always thought it strange how much I insisted on changing Sophie's diapers, bathing her, putting her to bed. Normal activities of any father were transformed into evidence of suspicious behavior. My interest in taking care of my own daughter was distorted to seem sinister. While the process was ongoing, I was prohibited from seeing Sophie. Temporary custody was granted to Vanessa, with supervised visits by her maternal grandmother, who came from another state to support her daughter during the crisis. The supervised visits were small moments of torture. Sophie, who used to run into my arms when she saw me, now seemed confused and distant. At just 2 years old, she didn't understand what was happening, but she perceived that something was wrong. Sometimes, when I arrived, she would hide behind her grandmother, looking at me with distrust. This destroyed me inside. I knew that Vanessa and her mother were manipulating Sophie, saying things about me, planting fears in her little head, but I couldn't prove it. I couldn't do anything but try to show my daughter, in the few minutes we had together, that I was still the same father who loved her more than anything. The judicial process dragged on for months. I lost my job. Nobody wants a supposed child abuser working in their company, even if the accusations haven't been proven yet. My supposed friends disappeared. On the few occasions I left the house, I felt the stares, the whispers. In a small town like ours, news like this spreads like wildfire. My parents spent all their savings hiring a lawyer, a good man, who believed in my innocence from the first day. He worked tirelessly, analyzing every detail of the case, looking for inconsistencies in Vanessa's account, gathering evidence of her history of emotional instability. 6 months after the initial accusation, when I had already lost hope, the first turning point happened. Mrs. Clara, Vanessa's aunt, sought out my lawyer. She was disturbed, confused. She said she had begun to notice strange behaviors in Vanessa, that she had heard her rehearsing testimonies in the bathroom, that she had caught her instructing Sophie about what to say to the psychologists who were evaluating her. More importantly, Mrs. Clara found Vanessa's real diary. Not the one presented to the police, but a notebook hidden at the bottom of a drawer where Vanessa wrote her real thoughts. In it, there was no mention of suspicions of abuse. On the contrary, there were page after page of rage against me for preferring Sophie, for threatening to take her daughter away, for making her look like an inadequate mother. And then the phrase that would seal the case. He'll regret having tried to take Sophie from me. I'll do something that will ruin his life forever. Something that no one ever forgives. Mrs. Clara handed the diary to my lawyer, who immediately presented it as evidence. But the judicial system is slow. The wheels were already in motion. Even with this new evidence, the accusation continued its course. That's when Vanessa made a mistake. Frustrated with the delay in the process, irritated with the doubts that were beginning to arise about her version, she raised the stakes. She presented new memories from Sophie, supposed phrases that the girl would have said about things I would have done. She described inappropriate behaviors that Sophie would be presenting. She even claimed to have found disturbing drawings made by the girl, but Sophie was only 2.5 years old at that time, barely able to hold a pencil, much less make recognizable drawings. The child psychologists who were monitoring her hadn't noticed any of the behaviors described by Vanessa. The inconsistencies began to accumulate, and then the final blow. During one of the supervised visits with Sophie's grandmother distracted on the phone, I managed a few minutes alone with my daughter. Not to do anything wrong, just to have a moment of real connection, without vigilant looks. Sophie climbed onto my lap, as she used to do before all this began. I tucked her hair behind her ear and asked if she was okay, if anyone had hurt her. I didn't expect a coherent answer. She was very small, but what she said broke my heart. Mommy says you're bad. Mommy says to say you hurt. But you don't hurt. Why can't I go home? A simple phrase, childish, broken, but clear enough. Somehow, I had the presence of mind to take out my cell phone and record the rest of our brief conversation. Sophie repeated in her 2-year-old language what Vanessa had been teaching her to say. This recording became the centerpiece of the defense. The judge ordered a new psychological evaluation of Sophie, this time with independent specialists. He also ordered a psychiatric evaluation of Vanessa, and with these new evidences, the lie that had ruined my life finally began to crumble. But the damage was already done. 1.5 years had passed. 1.5 years away from my daughter during her formative years. 1.5 years carrying the most despicable label a man can carry. And even with all the evidence pointing to my innocence, even with Vanessa beginning to contradict herself in her testimonies, even with the specialists concluding that there was absolutely no indication of abuse, the prosecutor continued with the case. After all, it was better to prevent than remedy when it came to a child's safety, he argued. That's how I ended up in the detention center, preventively, to ensure Sophie's safety while the case was being concluded. 2 months that turned into 2 years of hell. The day I was taken to the detention center is marked in my mind with painful clarity. It was a gray-skied Tuesday. My mother cried silently in the back seat of the car while my father drove to the courthouse. My lawyer tried to give me hope, saying it was only temporary, that the truth would soon come to light. I was in a state of shock and disbelief. How could this be happening to me? How could the system fail so completely in seeing the truth? I was being taken as a criminal when the only crime I committed was loving my daughter and wanting to protect her. At the detention center, the reality of my situation hit me with full force. I was subjected to the humiliation of the strip search, the change of clothes, the invasive questions. The worst was when they asked about my crime. In the prison universe, there's no lower place than a child abuser. For my safety, I was placed in a separate wing with other detainees accused of similar crimes. Some truly guilty, others perhaps as innocent as I was. In there, everyone claimed innocence. Who would believe us? The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. My case continued to drag through the courts. Each new hearing brought a small hope, soon crushed by more postponements, more requests for exams, more evaluations. My lawyer brought news from outside. Vanessa continued with her charade, but was beginning to show cracks. In one of the testimonies, she contradicted herself so many times that the judge himself showed irritation. Sophie's maternal grandmother, who initially supported Vanessa unconditionally, began to express doubts. Sophie, now almost 3 years old, was showing behavioral problems: aggression, regression, frequent nightmares. The psychologists attributed this not to any abuse I might have committed, but to the emotionally unstable environment that Vanessa was creating. Inside the center, I tried to maintain my sanity as best I could. I read a lot, any book I could get from the small library. I exercised obsessively in the yard during the sun period. I avoided conflicts, kept my head down. At night, in the darkness of the cell, I allowed myself to cry silently, thinking of Sophie, imagining how much she was growing, how much I was missing of her childhood. After almost a year of detention, I received the visit that would change everything. It wasn't my lawyer or my parents, as I expected. It was Mrs. Clara, Vanessa's aunt. She seemed to have aged 10 years, with sunken eyes, trembling hands. She told me that the situation had dramatically worsened. Vanessa had completely stopped her medication and was having psychotic episodes. In one of these episodes, she hurt Sophie, not severely, but enough for the neighbors to call the police when they heard the child's screams. Sophie was temporarily removed from the home and placed under the care of her maternal grandmother. Vanessa was involuntarily committed to a psychiatric clinic. And during this internment, in a moment of clarity or perhaps remorse, she confessed to one of the doctors that she had invented the whole abuse story. The doctor, bound by professional confidentiality, couldn't use this confession directly, but advised Vanessa to tell the truth to the authorities. She refused, preferring to maintain the lie rather than admit what she had done. That's when Mrs. Clara made her decision. She could no longer remain silent, watching an innocent child and an innocent man suffering. She sought out my lawyer again and, this time, offered to testify in court. She would tell everything she had seen, everything she knew about Vanessa's mental condition, about her obsession with control, about her anger when she felt she would lose her daughter. But the system is slow, terribly slow. Even with this new testimony, even with Vanessa committed, even with all signs pointing to my innocence, the process continued to drag on. It was during this period that something inside me broke. Not in a violent or explosive way. It was a silent break, like thin ice cracking under constant pressure. I realized that even if I was acquitted, even if the truth was finally recognized, something had been irremediably lost. My relationship with Sophie, these crucial years of her childhood, my reputation, my trust in the system, my faith in people. All of this was damaged, perhaps permanently. During this time, in the detention center, I wrote letters to Sophie. Letters I knew she wouldn't read. She was too small, and besides, no one would deliver them to her. But I needed this ritual, this connection, even if it was one-sided. I told about my day, asked about hers, drew little stick figures in the margins. I kept all these letters in a folder, dreaming of the day when I could give them to her when she was older and could understand what happened. At the beginning of the second year of detention, there was finally significant movement in the case. The judge, frustrated with the constant postponements and the increasingly clear evidence of fabrication of evidence, ordered a quick resolution of the process. Consecutive hearings were scheduled with all involved. Vanessa, still committed but considered lucid enough to testify, was confronted with all the inconsistencies in her account, with Mrs. Clara's testimony, with Sophie's psychological evaluations, which indicated absolutely no sign of abuse. And then, finally, she collapsed. In the middle of the hearing, she began to cry uncontrollably. Between sobs, she admitted that she had invented everything, that she never really believed I had hurt Sophie, that she did it because she was angry, because she was afraid of losing custody of her daughter, because she wanted to punish me for leaving her. Her lawyer tried to interrupt the confession, claiming that she wasn't mentally stable enough to testify. But it was too late. The truth was finally on record. The judge, visibly disturbed by the course of the case, ordered my immediate release. He issued a formal statement recognizing my complete innocence. He determined that Vanessa should answer for malicious prosecution and false testimony, besides determining that she continue psychiatric treatment as a condition for any future contact with Sophie. Temporary custody of Sophie was granted to my parents with the guidance that I should be gradually reintroduced into her life, with psychological support for both. After 2 years, I could finally leave the detention center. It should have been a moment of pure joy, of celebration. But when the doors opened and I saw my parents waiting, a complicated emotion took over me. Relief, yes, gratitude, no doubt, but also a deep anger and a feeling of injustice that I couldn't fully name. My first official visit with Sophie was surreal. She was 4 years old now, almost twice the age she was when I was taken away. She didn't recognize me immediately. How could she? To her, I was practically a stranger. When my mother said, "Look, Sophie, it's Daddy," she looked at me with curiosity, but without the recognition I had hoped for so much. It took weeks of short visits, of moments carefully orchestrated by psychologists, for her to start feeling comfortable with me. The first time she ran into my arms voluntarily, I almost broke down. It was like recovering a piece of my soul that had been torn away. But reintegration into society wasn't so simple. Even acquitted, even with Vanessa's confession, even with all the evidence of my innocence, the social scars remained. Old friends still kept their distance, neighbors still whispered, companies still hesitated to hire me when they checked my background. Accused of child abuse is a mark that doesn't easily erase, even when followed by cleared of all charges. It was during this period of readaptation that I made a decision. It wouldn't be a decision that many would understand. It wouldn't be something that psychologists would recommend. But it was something I needed to do to move forward. I decided to visit Vanessa. She was still in the psychiatric clinic, though no longer involuntarily committed. Now she was a voluntary patient, part of her agreement with the justice system to avoid prison. My lawyer was vehemently against this visit. My parents begged me to reconsider, but I needed to look her in the eyes one last time. I needed to understand if that was possible. The clinic was a calm place, with well-maintained gardens and pastel-colored walls, nothing like the detention center where I spent 2 years. I was led to a visiting room, where I waited for almost half an hour, nearly giving up several times. When Vanessa entered, I almost didn't recognize her. The once vibrant face was apathetic, the eyes without the intense shine that had attracted me so much years ago. She seemed older than her 24 years, as if time had weighed differently on her. She sat across from me without saying anything. We remained in silence for a long time, just looking at each other. I had rehearsed so many things to say, accusations, questions, even insults. But when I finally spoke, it was just a simple question. Why? She looked at her own hands, trembling slightly. Because at that moment I really believed you were going to take her from me and I couldn't bear that. A pause. The doctors say that during episodes, my perception of reality becomes distorted, that I create scenarios that don't exist, that I see threats where there are none. This isn't an excuse, she continued, now looking at me. I know what I did. I know what I took from you. I don't expect forgiveness. I expected to feel anger when I saw her, when I heard her. I expected the hatred I had cultivated during those years of injustice to overflow. But what I felt was something different, a mixture of pity, sadness, and, surprisingly, a kind of relief. I didn't come here to forgive you, I said. I came because I need to move forward. And for that, I needed to see that you're just a sick person, not a monster, just as I'm not the monster you accused me of being. She began to cry silently. She didn't say anything more, nor did I. I got up to leave, but before I reached the door, she spoke again. Sophie asks about you. During supervised visits, she talks about her dad, about the things you used to do together. She hasn't completely forgotten. Those words hit me like a wave. It was the first time anyone had told me that Sophie remembered me from before everything fell apart. I nodded, unable to speak through the knot in my throat, and left. That visit marked a turning point. Not because I forgave Vanessa. I don't know if I'll ever be completely capable of that. But because I could finally see the whole situation from a different angle. It wasn't just about me, about the injustice I suffered. It was about an inadequately treated mental illness, about a system that failed not only me, but Vanessa too, and mainly Sophie. In the following weeks, I worked with renewed determination to rebuild my life. I got a modest job, yes, in a small auto repair shop, where the owner didn't care much about my past, as long as I knew how to fix cars. I went back to school, resuming the technical course I had abandoned. And, most importantly, I continued the process of reconnecting with my daughter. Every small progress with Sophie was a victory. When she began to call me Dad spontaneously, when she asked me to read her a story before bed, like in the old days, when she held my hand as we walked in the park. Small moments that would be mundane for any other father, but that for me were invaluable treasures. The criminal justice system decided to be lenient with Vanessa, considering her mental condition. She didn't go to prison, but had her parental rights severely restricted. She would need to prove stability for years, with continuous and monitored treatment, before being able to request unsupervised visits with Sophie. Permanent custody was granted to me, with my parents as auxiliary guardians. Ironically, this legal resolution came quickly, much faster than the original process that condemned me, as if the system was trying to compensate for the error committed, hurrying to correct course. I felt no satisfaction with Vanessa's punishment. It wasn't about revenge for me. It was about recovering my life, about ensuring Sophie's safety and well-being, about starting over. But starting over doesn't mean forgetting. The scars remain in the distrustful looks from other parents on the playground when I pick up Sophie from school, in the nightmares I still have about the detention center, in Sophie's hesitation when I sometimes speak louder or make a sudden movement. Those 2 years left marks on all of us. The hardest part was explaining to Sophie as she grew up what had happened. How do you tell a child that her mother invented a terrible lie about her father? How do you explain why I was absent during crucial years of her life? The psychologists helped me find age-appropriate words to construct a narrative that didn't completely demonize Vanessa, but also didn't minimize what happened. Your mother got very sick here, I explained to her one day, pointing to my head. And when people are sick like that, sometimes they do things that hurt other people, even without meaning to. I don't know if that's the right explanation. I don't know if I'll ever find words that make complete sense. How do you explain the inexplicable to a child? How do you translate the complexity of human behavior, of mental illness, of the flawed legal system, into terms that a young mind can process? But I try. Every day, I try. I try to be the father Sophie deserves. Despite the circumstances, despite the lost time, I try not to let bitterness consume me, that anger define who I am. I try to find a path forward that isn't dominated by the past. It's not easy. There are days when the resentment is so strong I can barely breathe. Days when I look at Sophie and see all the moments I missed, her first steady steps, her first clear words, her first recognizable drawings, moments I can never recover. But then there are days like today, days when we're sitting in the park watching the birds, and she rests her head on my shoulder with such a natural, such a complete trust that makes all the battles worth it. Days when I realize that, despite everything, we still have a future together, that I can still be the father I promised to be when I first held her. Life inside the detention center changed me in ways I'm still discovering. In the first few months, I fought against a hatred so deep it frightened me. Hatred for Vanessa, for the system, for the world that allowed this to happen. I even planned what I would do when I got out, fantasies of revenge that embarrass me now. But with time, something strange happened. I met other men in there, some guilty, others innocent, like me. Men who had their own stories, their own traumas. One of them, a 60-year-old man named Robert, became a kind of mentor to me. He was serving a long sentence for a crime he really committed, but had found an inner peace that I envied. Hatred only poisons yourself, he would tell me. The person you hate doesn't even know you're destroying yourself inside. At first, I rejected this advice. I thought it was nonsense from someone who had conformed, but gradually I began to see the wisdom in those words. The hatred was consuming me, transforming me into someone I didn't recognize. And that, I realized, would be Vanessa's final victory over me. It wasn't a quick or linear process. There were days when I completely gave in to resentment, days when I cried nonstop, remembering Sophie's confused expression during the first supervised visits, days when I punched the cell wall until my fists bled. But there were also moments of clarity, moments when I could glimpse a future beyond those walls, beyond the anger. I began to read intensely, any book I could get from the small library. I learned chess from another inmate. I started writing a diary, recording not just my current thoughts, but also memories of better times, especially moments with Sophie. When I finally got out, I expected to feel only joy, but the reality was more complicated. I felt fear of the world that had changed, of the people who would judge me, of the relationship with my daughter that would need to be rebuilt almost from scratch. I still felt anger at a system that had failed me so completely, and I felt a deep sadness for the irreparable lost years. During those first months of freedom, the support of my parents was fundamental. They had visibly aged during those 2 years. My father's hair almost completely white, new wrinkles marking my mother's face. They sacrificed their retirement, their peace to fight for me and care for Sophie. This is a debt I can never fully repay. Today, almost a year after my release, I'm still rebuilding, piece by piece, day by day. Sophie and I are relearning how to be father and daughter. It's different from what it was before. It couldn't be the same. But in some moments, when she laughs at something I say, or when she hugs me spontaneously, I feel that we're creating something new that can be equally valuable. Vanessa continues in treatment. From the reports I regularly receive, she's progressing, maintaining her medication, participating in therapy sessions, acknowledging the severity of what she did. Her visits with Sophie are still supervised and limited, but occur without incidents. Sophie understands in a simplified way that her mother is sick and needs treatment. We don't nurture resentment in her. This is a conscious decision I've made. Whatever my future relationship with Vanessa, she will always be Sophie's mother. Social reintegration has been the most challenging aspect. Friends who disappeared during my time in detention now try to reappear as if nothing had happened. Some neighbors still look away when they see me. I had to move to a different town to get a decent job. Nobody seems willing to give a chance to someone who has been accused of a crime against a child, even if exonerated. But there are small victories. The new job, modest but stable, the simple apartment where Sophie has her own room decorated with drawings and vibrant colors, returning to studies, now with a clear goal of becoming a lawyer to someday help other innocents wrongfully accused. And perhaps the greatest victory of all, the ability to sit in this park, look at the sky, and feel something beyond anger and resentment. It's not forgiveness. I still don't know if I'll ever get there, but it's a kind of acceptance, an understanding that the past cannot be changed, but the future is still open. That I can choose to be defined not by what happened to me, but by what I do from now on. Justice failed me, But that doesn't mean the concept of justice is useless. The system has flaws, but that doesn't mean it can't be improved. People commit terrible mistakes, cause irreparable damage, but that doesn't mean all of humanity is condemned. Sophie turns 5 next month. We're planning a small party, just close family and some friends from school. She asked for a chocolate cake with strawberry frosting, exactly like the one she had at her first birthday before everything fell apart. I don't know if she really remembers that cake or if my mother mentioned it to her, but in a way, it doesn't matter. It's a connection to the past, a continuous line despite the rupture. A few nights ago, while reading a story to Sophie before bed, a ritual we've resumed and that is now sacred for both of us, she asked with the direct sincerity of children, "Daddy, are you still sad because of what Mommy did?" I paused, looking for the right words. "Sometimes, yes," I finally answered. "But what makes me happier is being here with you now." She nodded as if that made perfect sense. "I get sad sometimes too," she said. "But I like when we're together." In that simple moment, there was a wisdom many adults never achieve. The pain existed, yes. The injustice happened, but the connection between us, that fundamental love between father and daughter, had survived. Damaged, tested, but intact in its essence. If you've made it this far and really understood what I went through, I need you to like this video, subscribe to Traumatic Accounts, turn on notifications, and comment what time it is where you're watching from. It might seem like a strange request, but knowing real people are hearing my story in real time somehow makes all this more bearable, as if by sharing this burden, it becomes a little lighter. I'm not here to present myself as a hero or a perfect victim. I made mistakes along the way, moments when I lost patience with Vanessa during our relationship, times when I could have sought help earlier, decisions I made in the heat of the moment. If I had made different choices, perhaps none of this would have happened, or maybe it would have happened anyway. It's impossible to know. What I do know is that nothing is black and white in this story. Vanessa is not a one-dimensional monster. She's a person with a serious mental illness that wasn't properly treated. The judicial system is not a purely malicious entity. It's an imperfect structure operated by fallible humans, trying to navigate complex cases with limited information. And I am not just an innocent victim. I am a human being who reacted to trauma the best way I could. Sometimes getting it right, sometimes wrong. Perhaps that's the most important lesson I've learned. Life rarely offers clear villains and heroes. It offers complicated, contradictory people, capable of both great kindnesses and terrible cruelties, and it offers difficult, imperfect choices, but ours to make. Today I choose to move forward, not forgetting, but also not being defined solely by what happened. I choose to be the best father I can for Sophie, the best son I can for my parents who sacrificed so much for me, and maybe one day a lawyer who can help prevent others from going through what I went through. The coffee stain on the floor of the apartment where it all began is probably still there, but I'm no longer in that place. I'm here in this park watching my daughter play at a distance, building a new life from the fragments of the old one. And for today, just for today, that's enough.